French and Indian War massively changed history. The war began simply because the French and English were competitive. They are both trying to prosper in a new land where the potential could have skyrocketing effects. The French occupied Canada and had an interest in going south. On the other hand, the English controlled the 13 colonies. With the wave of new settlers arriving, they needed to expand westward. The demand for expansion in copious land fostered the inevitability of trading with native tribes. The French and English were in a constant battle over who would dominate the fur trade. The fishing grounds near Newfoundland were disputed hunting areas. Among the territorial strain, religious tension was also high, since the French were mainly Roman Catholics and the English were Protestant. The French and Indian War is a collection of 4 major seasons of war. Each side of the war was aided by Indian allies. The French turned to the Potawatomi, Winnebago, Ojibwa, Mississauga, and Huron. The British were aided by the Iroquois, although later in the war some of the French allies switched sides. Originally, the French had more troops and better supplies, but they were also outnumbered by the British 20 million to 60,000. The disputed land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River was the main cause of the war. The first war is known as King William's War, which lasted from 1689 to 1697. Queen's Anne War, the second war, lasted from 1702 to 1713 and was won by the British. King George's War took place in 1744 and ended in somewhat of a draw for the Third War. The largest and most eventful war is called the French and Indian War and served as the Fourth War. Also known as the 7 Years' War, it lasted for 7 years, from 1754 to 1763. This war marks a very important time in history as it pushed Great Britain into debt, which was a contributing determinal factor to the Revolutionary War. The last and final war, the French and Indian Wars, shaped history forever. Events fell into place and evolved into how the American Revolutionary War would play out. France started to fear that they would lose control of the fur trade in the Ohio counties. As a result, construction started on a chain of forts that ran along the Allegheny River at the eastern portion of the Ohio River Valley. As soon as the news reached the British, they were upset at the loss of land they thought they already owned. After each side had had enough of stepping on each other's toes, George Washington led colonial troops to flush the French out. Washington built a base camp that he named Fort Necessity as a non-permanent location. The French then attacked Fort Necessity and defeated George Washington. While the tensions were rising during the first few skirmishes, the Albany Congress met to plan for the military. The British general, Edward Braddock, marched a small troop of soldiers to seize a fort named Fort Duquesne. The attack resulted in defeat for 2 main reasons. The first was because General Braddock did not use Indian scouts. The second reason resulted from a failure to ambush it and gave the French time to prepare for an attack. The English were used to one means of battle, which was single-file rows of soldiers in bright red uniforms. The French adapted to fighting in North America by dressing more like the natives and using the element of surprise. In the fight, General Braddock was killed and George Washington rescued the remaining soldiers by escorting them safely. The British tried several times to take different forts such as Crown Point and Fort Niagara, but all attempts resulted in defeat. In 1756, Marquis de Montcalm succeeded in overcoming the British for Oswego. A year later, the French raided and destroyed Fort William Henry. At this point in the war, the British appeared to be losing to the French. Things would have continued to go downhill hadn't that William Pitt rose to power in Great Britain. Pitt sparked a wildfire in the hearts of the British soldiers that renewed the fight. While without Pitt the war would have been unsuccessful, Pitt caused Britain to go into huge debt by spending an insane amount of money on supplies. At the end of the war, Britain tried to make up for the loss in money by heavily taxing the patriots. Taxation, of course, led to a number of events that eventually caused the Revolutionary War. With the increase in supplies, the British captured in Fort Frontenac in Canada and Fort Congaroga in New York. General James led forces to conquer Quebec and succeeded by defeating the French on the Plains of Abraham on the outskirts of Quebec. In 1760, General Amherst captured Montreal. The French, who were quickly losing territory, were forced to surrender. In 1763, the war ended with the Treaty of Paris. The treaty resulted in Britain receiving almost all the French land in Canada and all the land east of the Mississippi River. Spain was forced to give up Florida, but ended up receiving New Orleans and all the French land west of the Mississippi River. The French only kept a couple of islands off of Canada. The French and Indian War had massive effects on how it changed history and nations.